Welcome to the Dork Forest. Jackie and her pals will never bore us. Shameless confessions
about our obsession
will make us laugh and smile. So let's explore the Dork Forest and dork out for a while.
Hi, Rangers. It's me, Jackie Kashian. Welcome to the Dork Forest. It's 2024. Let's do this. Here's the credits, of course. Mike Ruekberg sang that song at the beginning, and he wrote that song, and he sang it with Sarah Cohen, his wife, and he will sing the Mexican hat dance at the end of the program. Also, Patrick Brady, still putting this together. Video, audio, all of it. He's amazing. So, and Vilmos doing JackieKashianStore.com. Squarespace is doing the regular Jackie Kashian page, and I'm thinking of moving the Dork Forest and dorkforest.com away from WordPress because it's driving me nuts. But those are the credits. But if you go to JackieKashian.com, you can get Dork Forest merch. You can get my stand-up merch. You can get my stand-up CDs and DVDs, which you'd have to have devices for those. You can also see videos and find out any number of things. I have another podcast called The Jackie and Laurie Show, but the Dork Forest is the flagship. 18th year. We're doing it, you guys. You can go to my Bandcamp or my YouTube for extra content. Please donate, is what I'm saying. It's 2024, and I think we've been in this long enough. Why don't you guys, everybody send me $100? That's what I'd like you to do. You can PayPal me. There's links all over the pages. You can Venmo me at Jackie Kashian. You can find me at a stand-up show and hand me a sweaty wad of 20s. Do something. But I love doing the show. I would love to make some money, is what I'd like to do. In other news, I'm sure there's more things that I should talk about, but I can't think of them. But let's listen to who's going to dork out about something, because that's my favorite part. Thanks for listening, you guys. You're all great. Let's get into the show. It's Dork Forest time. Rangers, you know what else is it's almost time for? The Olympics. I am talking to Maria Kay, who lives here in California, fan of the Dork Forest, enjoys the show, emailed me and said, I am an Olympics dork. You don't understand. And I'm like, I don't understand. I like the Olympics, but let's find out more. Welcome to the program, Maria Kay.
I am so excited to be here because it is an Olympic year.
It is an Olympic year, and you wrote a book called Women in the Olympic Dream. It'll be linked in the website, in the notes rather, and your last name is K, but it's spelled K-A-J. So your website is kmeister.com, M-E-I-S-T-E-R. That'll also be in the notes. Winter Olympics, Summer Olympics, all the Olympics. What do you like?
All of it. All of it. Since 1896 going on.
You're not that old, huh? I just wrote that joke. I just wrote that joke right there. Okay. Since 1986 is when the Olympics started.
Yeah, the official modern Olympics started in 1896. There were actually a couple of times where they tried to get it going before 1896, but the guy who gets credit for starting them, Pierre de Coubertin, this old French aristocratic guy, he kind of dreamed up the idea. And got a bunch of his French and British friends kind of sitting around the table, drinking brandy, smoking cigars. Hey, let's do the Olympics. You know where we should have them? Let's have them in Greece. Hey, Greece, you don't mind? Greece kind of said, well, wait a minute. Actually, they had actually built a stadium and they tried to hold their own Olympics and it didn't quite work until the French aristocrats and the British aristocrats came along. So once they were there, they got it going in 1896. Yeah.
In Greece?
In Greece, in Athens, because that was where the original ancient Olympics had started way back before our time.
Right.
And, 500 BCE or whatever the year was. I didn't look up all my data, so I'm going to make up stuff today.
Yeah, mistakes will be made, but it's always, it was always in Athens. This we know. I remember marathon being a battle, and a guy ran 26.3 miles. And I mean, the Greeks, they were always exercising. This is what we know about the Greeks.
This is true. And there's a story that the guy ran the 26.3 miles and then he died. And so that's kind of like the legend. If you look it up, he expired. That's actually not true. There was a Roman guy who came along who was kind of joking. They call him satirists.
That guy.
And he made this joke, Lucian, he wrote about, and then he died at the end, but that caught people's imagination. So in 1896, when they were all sitting around the table drinking brandy and smoking cigars, this one French guy who had studied the classics, his name was Michel Breal, he said, and wouldn't it be great if the culminating of our new games would be this marathon thing that I've read about, and I will pledge a silver cup to the winner. And they ran 26 miles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so in the original games, when they held them, they did do the marathon. No one had ever done a race that long. They didn't know what they were doing,
Right.
but it kind of became this big marquee event. And all these guys who kind of ran the mile or shorter events, they went out there, and most of them didn't make it except for just a small handful of guys. And it turned out it was a Greek guy who was a water carrier. Again, don't remember his name, Spiridon Lewis,
Right.
I think. He comes in at the end trotting away, and they all, let him. They actually, there's the picture, the drawings have them crowding around him,
Right.
at the finish line, and then they lift him on their shoulders, huzzah, huzzah, and Greek. So the legend was born, and forever after, the marathon became one of the great, I guess, it is always the culminating event.
Yeah, it's a signature bit, right?
Yeah.
It's something that is definitely so in 1890, the 1890s, just a bunch of very wealthy French and British men decided that they wanted to see they were just big fans of sport. Is that it? They were just big sports fans.
Well, big fans of sports, and they were classic scholars, so they had studied the Greeks. And I think, two small things to understand. I won't do too much history because, if you press on
Please,
history,
no,
I could go.
You go loose.
Well, the thing is that sport today really was invented back in the 1850s and 1860s, right? You have to imagine that before the American Civil War, or before that middle of the last century, sport was kind of a couple guys played tennis. Henry VIII played tennis, or they raced horses, or they rowed boats, or kicked the ball around. That was it, and it wasn't organized, and they didn't fight. They didn't compete against other countries. So in the late 19th century, there's this bloom of all these different interests in sports. We start inventing sports. Baseball gets invented. Basketball gets invented. Volleyball. Track clubs start pitting races against each other at like 1860, 1870. There's no track clubs until that time frame. And it's also the same time when the colleges, both in the United States and elsewhere, they start, in creating colleges, and that creates an opportunity for sport. So the thing to understand is that all these things kind of came together at the same time. You have an interest in sport, people doing sport. You have more people who are working class. They have a little bit more leisure time because they're not working on farms and whatnot.
Right.
And so there is an upwelling of interest in sport at the same time that there's also this look back to, you have all these colleges. So these guys are going to colleges, and they're reading about the Greeks and the Romans, and so that's how it all sort of comes together. They're interested in it. People are doing sports, and the wealthier aristocrats, they want to preserve the gentleman athlete. So as they create these new international competitions, the original idea was we need to make sure that there are amateurs. They're gentlemen amateurs. They cannot be paid. And at the time, they were really debating about what does that mean? Does that mean you can't be paid to run, or you can't be paid to do any kind of sport, or you can't be paid to do anything? And those rules about amateurism actually fluctuated in the first 20 years to the point where, like, if you were paid to work, you weren't allowed to, compete.
Like if you had a job.
Yeah.
If you just had a job.
No,
because gentlemen don't work. Gentlemen, for some, they have generational wealth, and they sit around on their butts and then go work out.
Well, if you remember the movie Chariots of Fire, did you ever see that movie?
Not
so. They're running on the beach, right?
Yep.
So there's one scene in there where Lord Lindsay, who's a hurdler, he puts the hurdlers out in his backyard, which is, 1,000 acres. And the butler puts these champagne glasses on the hurdles. If you can kind of picture that, whether you saw the movie or not, that's the perfect gentleman athlete. Oh, I go out in my backyard and I jump the hurdles to make sure the champagne doesn't tip.
Right. You have to make sure. And yeah, I do not remember that scene. I did
Well,
see
you know,
Chariots of Fire.
yeah.
You know what I did just see? I just saw Boys in the Boat.
Was
Which
it
is
good? I know all about it, but I did not see it. Was it good?
well, it's streaming now, so look forward to that.
I
And
will.
George Clooney directed it, and it's essentially about college guys rowing.
Yeah,
It's a rowing team, and they went to the 1936 Olympics,
they did.
but the Harvard team and it was all East Coast muckety mucks, Whitey Magoos in fancy Ivy League schools that had always done rowing. And
Yeah.
these were just, they're like a pile of lumberjacks. And because it was
Washington, I think, right?
yeah, Washington State. And so, and it actually is, if you like a sport movie, and
Yeah,
I like Rudy, I like Hoosiers. I
Very
don't like
good.
my dog. Allow me to yell at him real quick here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Tyson, nobody cares. There you go. Anyway, so, but so in the initial, what were the first, was it a Summer Olympics, probably? The first Olympics?
The very first one was pretty small because it was kind of bootstrapped pretty quickly.
And invitation only, I imagine.
Yeah, more like they could barely get the money to put it on because again, the French and the British guys sat around and said, "Hey, you know what? It would be great, Greece, if you did this." And they didn't have the money, and so they kind of had to do a lot of arm twisting. And eventually, I think the king of Greece or the prince of Greece or whatever he was found the money, and so they it was relatively small. And then the next two games, there was one in Paris in 1904.
Okay.
Sorry, 1900 Paris, and then in St. Louis in 1904. They were attached to World's Fairs. So World's Fairs take time, they're over 6 months. So the Olympics actually took place over 6 months. And if you were at those games, you probably didn't even know they were Olympics there. It'd be like, I went to Epcot, and while I was, having some ice cream, I saw an Olympic competition.
Right. I saw some boxing match or some.
And it turned out, and there were people in it who were playing croquet. Oh, you won a medal. Oh, did I? There was the first lady American to win a golf, women's medal. Never even got any sort of plate or recognition or anything until like years later they sent it to her family. So she didn't even know she won.
Oh, wow.
Olympic medal.
And when was that?
That was the 1904 games in St.
So
Louis.
the women were athletes from the beginning.
Well, so yeah, exactly. So what happened was in 1896, men only, gentlemen amateurs only, and they ran the marathon. And a woman showed up named Stamata Rabithi to run with all these other people, and they wouldn't let her run. And she tried to talk her way in. And, no, you can't do it. So the story goes, and it was reported in the Greek newspapers of the time. The story goes that she showed up the next day, told the newspapers to come. She was staying with the mayor. I tell this whole story in there, so I'll give you the abbreviated version. Basically, she ran the marathon, and it's recorded in history in the newspapers that she ran it. It took her like 4 or 5 hours. And, it's not in the official Olympic book.
Right. Well, because she ran the next day, right?
Yeah. She ran the next day and she recorded a time according to history. And if you go to, Olympics.com now, or the official site the IOC runs, the International Olympic Committee runs, she's there. So as far as I'm concerned, she's in the record books, even though she's not in the official. So she was the first one to sort of push her way in. In the next two games, they had a couple of competitions in croquet and archery. And that's where women were sort of allowed. Again, it was a little loosey-goosey because it was like the expo.
It was new, yeah.
Yeah. And so by the time you got to 1908, though, and they were making rules, they were really restricting what women could do. And they were only allowed pretty much gymnastics and archery. That was kind of
right. It was something that was feminine. And for some reason,
doing a long dress or, very, very long skirts kind of thing.
Right. Something where you couldn't run.
Well, even in 1912, they kind of pushed their way into the swimming competitions. But the
Okay.
American guy who ran the American group, James Sullivan, he was so against their participation. He said, well, our U.S. women can only swim if they wear skirts. So if you want to go, fine, but you can't wear a swimsuit. You have to wear a skirt. So American women did not participate in swimming at the beginning when they had an opportunity to do so.
Right, because they would have lost horribly.
Yeah, and they
Yeah.
didn't, swimming in
You're
skirts is a
wearing
little.
yeah, it's a lot of clothes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
It's
I had to do that kind of thing when I was in lifeguard training, way back when, and it's not easy to swim with, shoes and skirts.
right, the full shoes.
Yeah,
Um yes, I just watched a Miss Fisher's murder mystery last night, and it was about uh, car racing in in the beginning, like in 1928, there was auto racing, and they wouldn't let women drive, and they wouldn't let
yeah,
women be in auto racing. But Franny Fisher, turns out, Miss Fisher's Murder Mysteries, Australian TV show, she's gonna use her money to encourage women to be in. But so in the first, so there was croquet, and there was archery, and there was running.
yeah.
What other sports were in it?
Oh, in general, like not
Yeah.
that the women did, but in general, they had a lot of the track sports that we would be familiar with. So they did have running and throwing and jumping and flinging.
Oh, javelins and discus,
Yeah,
and
yeah, because the Greek
because it was
stuff,
Greek,
the
right?
Greeks, and the reason they knew what the Greeks did, though, you have to remember, is because it was painted on the urns that they were digging up.
Right.
So if you ever remember, it's not like the Greeks wrote a lot about the Olympics. They didn't. They had some records, but they didn't. It wasn't that exact. So you have to always think about the Olympics as being made up in
Okay.
1896 by
Oh,
people who are
right.
kind of inventing it as they go along. So whenever anybody says something about, well, that's not part of the tradition, it's like, well, like the tradition.
Right. They were creating the tradition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they also, from the beginning, they had shooting competitions, lots of different rifle and pistol things. There were a lot of competitions that went back to the military. So both the shooting competitions and the equestrian came out of military traditions, both, horse parades and jumping over things and
Oh,
whatnot.
right.
They had
Steeple
fencing. Fencing
fencing.
was a big thing. And they also had originally they had both horse polo, polo played
Oh,
on
right.
horse.
Oh, polo teams.
Yeah. And then they also had water polo. Water polo has been a sport that is really big almost from the beginning. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Well, how do they get the horses to? No, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
That's
So the water polo took off, and it's also, it's like a really big sport, whereas the horse polo didn't stay, and they kind of got rid of that after the first couple of games.
well, because regular polo is so expensive.
Yes.
You have to have a string. That's why they call it a string of polo ponies. So you have to have at least
Right.
6 horses, and that's everybody on the team.
Yeah,
And
pretty
there's
much.
like
And then you need
6
giant
people.
venue and,
Yeah, there's 5 or
Art,
6
yeah.
people. There's also there's a mountain bike polo team sport.
I didn't know that.
Yes, there's if you have a mountain bike and polo mallets, and
I've seen it on segways. I know they do segway polo.
oh, have you seen Segway polo?
I have because I saw, what's the name of the guy that invented Apple, whose name is not Steve Jobs? Oh, Wozniak.
Okay.
Wozniak is on a Segway polo team. I saw that on TV a
Oh,
while
that's
ago.
fascinating. I
Yeah.
knew a guy who was on a mountain bike polo team, and you have to have 2 or 3 bikes because the bikes get hammered with the mallets,
Oh, it
and
would.
you have to have a couple of bikes because your
Yeah,
bike can
yeah.
get trashed in the middle of a game.
Well, and it might be a very popular sport, but it's hard to get a sport into the Olympics. It has to sort of have an uprising. You have to create national groups. You have to have international groups, and there has to be sort of plurality. Lots and lots of different countries have to play a sport in order for it to get into the games. And it's always been a controversy about things like baseball in particular, because the few countries that play it are very passionate about it. Japan and Cuba and the United States and Australia and whatnot. But you don't have that many countries, and you need a really big venue for it. So that's
Right.
why, got in, and then I kind of got kicked out, and I think it was in again. I don't know whether it's going to be in
Right.
Paris or
And
not.
there's no soccer, right? There's no is soccer in them?
Okay. Oh, yeah, in the games. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, and I know hockey is too, because I
But
remember
ice hockey and
1981
field
or
hockey,
something.
yes.
Uh,
Yes.
it was a very important political hockey game. What about chess? Is chess still is? Are there anything
No,
like that?
I don't know whether I don't know whether the International Chess Federation has ever tried to put it
Right.
in. I mean, I know you're trying to come up with an idea, but on the other hand, there are, you know, shooting, argumentally,
Uh, d-
archery is not that hugely physical of a
right. And
sport.
what about bowling and darts? I
Yeah.
mean, are these either of
Well,
those in there?
bowling has tried to get in a lot, and I think they've even done it as a demonstration sport. And it's just, between the venue and you just don't have enough of an upswelling of interest
Right.
to make it in.
And how about darts?
I don't know.
Okay,
I have
fair
to
enough.
research- I have to
It's
research that.
okay. So they were always one Olympic. I remember as a kid when they split them up and made them into winter and summer.
Well, so to go back to the question you asked 5 minutes ago, they actually in 1908, 1912, the earliest ones, they had figure skating and hockey and things. There was winter and summer, and they split them around the 1930s, 1920s. After
Okay.
World War One, they split into a winter and summer versions, mostly because the winter venues in Europe, the skiing places like Chamonix and, the Alps and whatnot, they wanted to have their own little tourist event thing. So that's what first happens. And so I don't remember which year. So sorry, 1928, 1924, something like that. France is going to host the summer games. So they also host the winter games. And so for many years, the same country did both winter and summer.
That's what happened when I was a kid.
Yeah.
They started staggering them every 2 years, and
But they
then
did because, it's just like it's so expensive to put them on, and then you couldn't have the same country doing both of them. And so you probably remember back in the 1990s, late 80s is when they split them finally. They had two winters back to back in
right.
92 and 94, and then they kind of started staggering them.
That's
So,
it.
yeah.
Okay,
So
that's what I vaguely
if you love the Olympics, you get them more often. So it's great.
Right. What yeah, so we're in the 20s, and then they split them between winter and summer, but it's in the same country the
Yeah,
same
same
year.
country, same year until same country until, I don't know, 1960s or something. And finally the countries went, we can't do this too much. So then they split them by country. And then in the 1990s, they split them into the 2 year staggered.
Wow. Okay, so this year is 2024.
Yeah.
What's happening?
Paris. So Paris is
winter or
summer.
It'll be the summer.
Yeah.
The Summer Olympics are in Paris this year, you guys. I've just learned that.
Late June.
Late June.
And in fact, end of June. The thing that I would tell your, dork friends who may not know this already is that the big thing will be the GOAT, the GOAT of France is Teddy Riner. Teddy Riner is going for his sixth medal. He's got, I think, 3 gold, 2 bronze, something like that. He's going for his sixth medal. So if you think about it, that's like 20 years of being a competitor. And he is the big guy in France because his sport is judo. And he's the 6'8" tall giant of a man who is a super heavyweight judoka going for his thing. So he's kind of like the Michael Phelps of France.
Okay, and this is his 6th Olympics?
It will be his 6th Olympics.
And his 6th Summer Olympics.
Yes.
And every time in judo, and he always wins the gold. He usually wins the gold.
3 gold, 2 bronze. So
Okay.
he doesn't always win, apparently.
But he always fights.
He does fight, and he's big, and he likes what's called the ippon, which is when you in judo when you flip them, right? So
Okay.
in judo, there's lots of ways to win, but judo flipping them is that's like the pin in wrestling or the slam dunk in basketball or
Okay, so it's the shiny thing.
It's the big shiny thing, yeah. And he's very good, very dramatic.
That's awesome. So do you have favorite episodes? They're not episodes. Do you have favorite years of the Olympics?
I have so
Have
many.
you looked at old do you watch old footage?
Oh yeah. Well, first of all, I still have beta tapes that I taped from the games of 1984, 1988.
You committed to beta. All right.
Yeah. So, I mean, I also have VHS tapes too, but I still feel like, maybe I might figure out what to do with those beta. I don't have a beta machine anymore. And my VHS machine, I don't think the remote still works, so it's always
you should definitely get those digitized.
I for sure, and much of it
it's not that expensive, and they will do it. Yes.
The reason to have it is because I like the little sports. I actually don't. I mean, I don't mind, all the swimming, the Americans swim, and they, all the semis, and I don't mind track, but I actually do like to watch the sports that are not necessarily the marquee ones. So I like things like wrestling and judo, but also rowing. I like rowing. I like water polo. America is going for either its 3rd or 4th gold medal in water polo. The women's team is the most dominant team no one's ever heard of.
Right. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. I like diving.
Diving is awesome. And America does very well in that. So, I like other sports. I like it when other countries win too, but it's always like
sure. It doesn't matter. I mean, I'm sure someone cares that the United States dominates, but it would be nice. Yeah. I like to see the cool sport.
Yeah, and so it can be fun. The way to do it though is. When you pick your sport, you gotta watch at least the semifinals and the finals. And it can even be better to do, watch some of these. Like, I like the idea of find a new sport that you don't know, commit yourself to it, and you can find this all through Peacock or NBC Sports or, online, whatever. They're showing all these preliminaries and things. And then when you see at least some of the preliminaries, then you get to know the competitors and who's going to what. So, it can be fun to get into something like handball, which America doesn't play at all.
Okay.
So, you don't even have the bias or the competitive, the
right. You're just watching.
You're just watching. And then you get to know, oh, wow, France is good. Russia's good. Go watch it.
Handball? We're talking about gloves? What are they wearing? How is
handball is a sport. It's like soccer on a smaller, area. 2 goals, 2 teams. There's an area in front of the goal that you're not
team handball. How many people are on the team?
I don't know, 10, something like that, maybe 10.
Like a full on team, and then there's a court, like a basketball court, or
well, with a goal, so more like a little
like a field hockey or something like that, right?
Yeah, but it's played on a
grass
gym floor, right? Because you can bounce the ball and you pass. And you bounce and you run and you can't go right up to the net. There's an area in front of the net that you can't go, in front of. So the players will pass, and then they'll come up and they basically leap up and throw the ball to try to get it past the goalie.
What? What are they wearing? Any kind of pads or is the ball hard? No. How big is the ball?
It's like a little bouncy ball, like this big.
Okay, not so bigger than like a softball or a little bigger?
Yeah, but bouncy.
But it bounces.
Yeah, but it bounces. See?
What a crazy sport. I might look into this sport. We have Peacock. We have all the things except Apple. I don't know why we don't have Apple. But I try to watch at least one of something a month just because everything's $8. But we have Peacock, and that's what it's going to be on this year?
Yes. I mean, NBC has had the Olympics for a number of years. They do a very good job with it. But they also, in their prime time, coverage at night, they sort of play to their favorites. And so they tend to show gymnastics, swimming, track, and basketball, and pretty much not much else. But in the last, 20 years or so, they've also been streaming everything else. So you can, if you would like, go in and sort of pick a sport that you don't know and see the semifinals of it. And because it's not something well known, it's not like all over the internet what happened. You may
Right.
not even know, right? And then, so like you're watching this like it's just a real competition. Oh, I didn't know. Wow. What
Right. It's so weird. We ran into some weird winter sports last time that we were just like, oh, I didn't even know that. And I don't remember what they are. So I think it might have been like the ski jump where they just try to go as far as they can. You know that skiing?
That's the ski jump thing. Yeah.
Is that just literally just called ski jump?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing where they wouldn't even let women do that until 2012. Women had to sue to get in because it was thought it was too dangerous, even though women had been doing it for, there was a famous baroness ski jumper in Europe. So like women were well known for doing it, but it was one other of those examples where the men decided, no, we just think it's dangerous for you. They did have this theory called uterine prolapse. So in the first half of the 20th century, the idea
Am I about to get very angry? Go ahead.
They thought that when women did physical activity, running, jumping, ski jumping, basketball, that their uterus would fall out. So the original rules for basketball were created right in the early 20th century. Women, it was played on a half court. Women were supposed to pass, and they were supposed to pass until they got right under the basketball or under the net, and then they could shoot. But they weren't supposed to do any sort of all the wonderful athletic stuff that both men and women do today. Women were not allowed to do. And the sport got very popular internationally. It's very popular in Australia. Basketball is very popular in Australia.
Okay.
But the version that they first played turned into a version called netball, and it's one of the most popular sports that Australia still plays. If you're in a corporation, you may have an intramural netball, group.
Oh, okay.
We have softball here in the U.S. So you'll see people, and it's a sport that you play where you basically pass the basketball until you get right under the net, and then you shoot. No jumping, and that comes from basketball.
And that's where that came from.
Yeah.
And is it also still a smaller court? Is it sort of still a half court game?
Yeah, a little bit smaller. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the uterine prolapse thing, it affected ski jumping. They didn't want women to run long distances because they were worried that they would be.
And there was no science. There was no science that.
There was no science. there was pseudoscience. Doctors all the time would say this is what's going to happen, but they didn't actually do any medical studies from it. And when women were trying to run the marathons, they weren't allowed to run the marathons at all until 1980s, but they were trying to get into the marathons in the 1960s. They had to kind of push their way, and there was a famous incident where a woman kind of crashed the Boston Marathon, and a guy tried to push her out of it and rip her number off, and there's a whole story about that. But this was because they were worried that women couldn't physically make it, and the women said to the doctors, well, do some studies. And the doctor said, well, there aren't enough of you running, so we don't have enough subjects to prove whether or not you're able to run. So you can't run because we don't have studies because no one's running.
Wow. That is such convoluted He-Man boy crazy, like you can't play kind of thing. We don't want you to play. And you're like, well, we don't want to play with you. We don't have to. Though, of course, eventually... I think it will be like some of these competitions. I think will be co-ed, and then
equestrian has always been co-ed, even though it came out of the military.
Yeah.
But when women started participating in the 1950s, they participated along with the men, and all of the equestrian events have since then been both men and women competed against each other.
That's interesting. Are the horses any particular
No, no, but it is
gender born? No?
it's a little unfair because the horses don't get the medals. If they,
Right. Right,
yeah,
right. The horses, I mean, I'm sure there's carrots involved. But they probably get real nice a
if you think
treat.
about the Kentucky Derby, like we know the names of the horses,
Yeah.
Secretariat and whatnot.
Seabiscuit.
Seabiscuit, right? But if they had been in the Olympics, we wouldn't know them. We'd know their jockey names because the
Oh,
jockey.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
And so the equestrian is it the only one that's co-ed?
I think. Well, sailing was for a while. I think they split it. The shooting events were co-ed until in the 1970s, women won. I'm not joking. I'm not joking. They
Holy
won in
shit.
a rifle medal, and then they said, "Oh, okay, well, we'll give the women their own division," but they were still co-ed in the pistols until a woman won a gold medal, and then they said, "Oh no, now we'll split it again." So
Wow.
yeah,
That is so irritating. I cannot express.
it's kind of why I wrote the book, is because I didn't want to just write about famous women that did things, even though
Yeah.
that's interesting. It was more about, look at all these things they had to do. They had to push every single sport, every single person, again and
Right.
again.
Specifically, it had to be done one at a time
Yeah.
because the gatekeepers were very specific gentlemen.
Yeah, and they might have allowed
so-
gymnastics, but then they didn't want this, and they might have allowed, running, but then they wouldn't allow any combat sports, and da 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 da. And so even today, they're allowed to ski jump, but not off the big hill. And they do wrestling, but they don't do Greco-Roman wrestling, even though Greco-Roman wrestling came out of Scandinavia and men and women did it at the time. So it's like women did all these sports. It's just a question
Right.
of when they can be allowed to go forward. Now, nowadays, the IOC is more enlightened, and they do have a policy for any new sport. Any new sport coming in has to have a male and female group, or women have to have parity for anything new, just not necessarily the legacy sports are very slowly catching up.
Okay. Legacy sports. Well, I'm vaguely irritated, but I will say that that I did have, and this I've told this story before, but I don't know if I've told it on the Dork Forest, which is several weeks ago I was in New York and I was talking to one of the younger comics, and he's like one of these edgelord guys. He wants to be edgy, and for some reason, trans women playing basketball came up, and he was like, well, it's just not fair. And I looked at him and I was like, it's so great that you're so interested in women's sports, because why do I know that 6 years ago you were talking about how the WNBA wasn't compelling basketball, and now because it's somehow compelling basketball, I don't sports are not my jam, right? I mean, I think it's really cool what people can do, but I don't follow it, right? So but I think that obviously everyone should get to do the thing that they're obsessed with. I mean, if you want to play a thing, whether it's a board game or D&D, because sometimes even nerd sports and nerd video games, there were boy gatekeepers
Oh
who would
yes.
say, well, girls can't play. And you're like, no, girls can play. It'll be fine. They're like, you're distracting. You're going to distract me from my dungeon playing. And you're like, I'm going to poke you in the ear with this pen if you don't let me play my tabletop board game. Anyway, tabletop game. So, it's such a weird. That's why I'm talking, by the way, to Maria K. And it's Kmeister, KAJMEISTER.com. And the book is Women and the Olympic Dream. And then there's a bunch of words under it. Because it's specifically, and does it cover, okay, because it doesn't look like a very long book. It's obviously It's an overview, right? It's good. It's good.
Well,
300 pages, right?
It was it's in the academic market, but it's very readable. It's not an academic book.
There you go.
That is to say, it is long enough, and it covers the whole thing. It goes 1896 to 2021. In fact, that's part of the title: "Continuing Struggle for Equality." I just got my master's in history, so I've learned that's how historians title things. They have the big title, and then blah 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 blah, and then they're supposed to put the time period.
Oh, okay, because to make sure that everyone knows.
It's not for that, and it's not. It is exactly that. So it goes through Tokyo, but it's really about all of the things that women had to do to get into the games, one sport at a time, one group at a time. So it doesn't cover every famous woman sports person. It's really more about how did they push to get in.
And it just has some great stories in it, and it just has it has a lot of great info and a lot of, but it's not definitive, and it doesn't have to be because it's such a huge topic. Like you can't we're going to talk for an hour. We could talk for 30 hours. We could talk for ever since so there was one in 1896, then they didn't have another one until 1904.
1900, I misspoke,
1900.
So that's when they put it on they put it on kind of a 4-year range, as they were going to hook it into the World Expos, the World's Fairs.
Oh, right.
But Greece actually had another one in 1906 because they had the stadium.
Oh, right.
They had one, and America showed up. America did very well, but the IOC, the powers that be decided after the fact that because they didn't run it, it wasn't an official Olympics. So it's actually called the Intercalated Games. So, whatever.
So know in your heart that guys that are in charge aren't going to rewrite. They're going to move the goalposts, whether you're a man or a woman. Yeah. Know in your heart that they're just going to move the goalposts if they're babies.
Is what they say it is, whether it is what it was.
Right. It's just, it's very silly. Yeah. But I'm glad, are there any sports that have dogs in them? I don't know why this has just occurred to me. I'm running out of questions, but that's not true. But
not in the Olympics. And if they want to get the sport into the Olympics, it would have to be international. You'd have to have country-based competitions,
right? Because
you could.
Because there are international dog competitions, to my knowledge.
They'd have to petition to make their case.
Okay.
Gymnastics is in, rhythmic gymnastics is in, trampoline is in, surfing, skateboarding. I thought rock climbing was going to be a strange idea, and it's the most fascinating thing. That's another thing you got to go check out, because what they can do is phenomenal.
What are the rules of
the rocks with this little tiny thing?
So in a rock climbing course, do they ever do it in nature, or is it a pre-built course like a rock wall?
Course.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you know offhand what the rules are for rock climbing internet?
Well, they split them into a couple different groups. One of them is speed, so you have two guys go up at the same time and see who goes fastest. So these are those things that look like they're at REI or whatever. If you go to the rock climbing venues, but they're much taller. And they go really fast. So that's one. And then the other one is they give them they call it a puzzle, I think. But it really means we just put these tiny little holes way up here, and you have to figure it out and do it as quickly as you can. But, you can't do it fast. So when you see these guys hanging off the rock with this little tiny thing that's go up here, it is, the Olympics is basically, you can find anything interesting as long as you know the rules and you sort of understand a little bit about the competitors. You might not immediately say, "Oh, it's handball or rock climbing," but you get into it pretty fast once you see 2 or 3 people who are really good.
And if they're doing something that you've never seen anyone compete against with somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Yeah, it's fascinating. What Now, I remember there being one in the Winter Olympics where you would ski and shoot.
Biathlon, baby.
Biathlon. Is that a good one?
It's one of my favorite ones, and I say that because the guy who was commentating last year, kept saying, "Oh, that's biathlon, baby." I mean, what happens is you're so tired that the shooting is difficult. So the shooting is inaccurate. So they have to go, and when they're shooting, you got lay down right there and shoot these tiny targets that are the size of like a coin, but they're 200 yards. Shoot a coin at the end of a football field after you've been running. Doing this.
Okay, so it's cross country. Biathlon is cross country skiing.
Yeah, really
with
fast.
a rifle on your back.
Yes.
And then you stop, and then you have to lie down, or can you do it standing?
Well, there's one where you stand. There's two positions. Some of them you have to lie down, and some of them you have to stand up. And I don't know if it's the length of a football field, but it's really far, maybe half the length of a football field.
Right, and the course
really
itself,
away, little tiny.
And the course itself is different lengths, like a mile or a half mile, or
yeah, 5, something like that. Longer than
meters.
That. More like 5 miles, 10 miles, something like that.
Oh wow!
Yeah, long.
Yeah. Have you ever done any cross country skiing?
Well, no, I don't ski. I'm not a ski thing because I'm not very athletic. I'm a little. I can bicycle and I can swim and bike and I can walk a little bit, but I don't ski. And then I'm very nervous when I go fast, so I don't like to go anything downhill.
I don't. Right. I always wanted to learn how to skateboard, and River Butcher has always told me that he would teach me, but I've never taken them up on it because I can't. I cannot.
Yeah. I
might be aged out because I'm.
You can't though, and I'll tell you what. My son is he was a big skateboarder. He's now a physicist, but he still skateboards. And I went out once, maybe about 10 years ago, when he and his sibling were on the skateboards, and I was going to go skateboard, and I got on, and I went about a foot, and I realized it's not safe. It's not safe.
It is not safe. The one time I tried to
no.
The one time I tried to skateboard with any speed, I genuinely broke my wrist.
Yeah.
And and I scraped up my leg so bad that I didn't know I'd broke my wrist.
You get it.
Yeah, I get it. I'm good at I used to play 360, which is a video game about skateboarding, and that was I was really good at that. And I was also good at the video game track and field.
And they've been trying to get, they have been trying to get video game playing in the games. And I think there's after the Olympics games where they do whatever, Let's Play or Play, whatever the name.
Well, because I've always liked the X Games. I was so psyched when they put the cool X games into the Olympics.
They're working on it a little bit
at a time. There's half pipe snowboarding, and there's skateboarding, and
there's also BMX. BMX is a big Olympic game thing.
Oh, right. That's
men on the tiny bikes.
Yeah, men on the tiny
bikes. And women
bikes.
too, because women get to. And who likes to? The country that really likes BMX is Colombia.
Oh, weird.
Yeah, the Colombian BMX riders are just.
They dominate.
They're very. Yeah. But that's another thing that's really fun about the Olympics is if you can connect, like, one team that's really good at rugby is Fiji. And you're like, well, Fiji. I mean, and not only New Zealand, like New Zealand's the big rugby powerhouse. Now, rugby was created in England, in the rugby school in Eden, but the British colonized, and so they brought their sports with them. So they brought rugby to the South Pacific. The Fijians love it. They brought badminton to Indonesia. Indonesians are phenomenal at badminton.
Are they?
Basketball is going all around the world. Water polo, the countries in the Balkans, like Serbia and Croatia, man, they go at it in water polo. They burn each other's flags. They have riots.
Oh my God! Right. So they're committed. Right. What about cricket? Cricket is so long and it's a slow roll. I understand.
Yeah, and India has been trying to get cricket in for a long time, but what I read was that the cricket players are a little elitist, back to that gentleman athlete thing, and they just don't want to sully the game by putting.
Oh, they don't want everyone to play it anyway.
I think
So,
a little bit of
because
that.
I know that Australia and India and Great Britain, and then I think some of the uh, islands in the South Pacific.
Very much so cricket. Yeah, big Pakistan
Yeah,
sector. Yeah.
right. So, I do miss the fact that there's no polo. I now I kind of want to find, because I'm sure polo is being played somewhere and I could watch it.
That's right. I guarantee you could. And I don't know why. I mean, I would think that the limitation there would be the venue. It would just need a really big stadium and a lot of money to support it. And, these countries little cities have a hard enough time kind of putting it on.
I
And
think LA's gonna host it again, isn't it?
they have the ones, they have 2028. So the ones after
2020.
Paris are going to be in LA.
Okay.
Very excited. That's 4 years.
Yeah, 4 years. It'll be here, I guess.
Yeah.
Are there, when they add a new sport, do they take an old sport out? Is there a finite number, or
they have been trying? And actually, when they added a bunch of the surfing and skateboard and whatnot, they actually booted wrestling out. And that was crazy because wrestling was like the original Greek sport, right?
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
the wrestling community came back and said, no, we'll get behind it. We'll prove that we really have the fans. And they petitioned strongly enough. And then, they had enough time to petition their way back in. But there's this thing called gigantism, which is the idea that the Olympics are just getting too big. And, when
Okay.
when they were adding them in the 1940s and 1950s and they were adding all these sports, they did have a really big fear that it would become too big. And that's an ongoing fear.
Right.
So it isn't as simple as saying, well, if we add one, we have to take one away. But it's more the case of they want to bring in new participation. They want to make sure that new sports that are really big get their due. And they also want to reevaluate things like maybe baseball that takes I'm a huge baseball fan. And don't get me wrong. I'm a big baseball fan, lifelong.
Okay.
But, not that many countries play it. And it does take up a giant resource. And a lot of countries don't necessarily, Barcelona wouldn't have had a baseball stadium to begin with. So what are they going to do
Right.
with it? Whereas if it's more like a soccer stadium or a handball gym, you can reuse that for other purposes. So, when it's dedicated to a particular shape as baseball is, it's less likely to be able to make the case that it deserves to be.
Right. It doesn't seem.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. And baseball, like, I don't know anything about baseball here except for that the Milwaukee Brewers are a team.
Yeah.
And from that look, not a great team. Are they just okay?
Milwaukee, I thought they were good a couple years ago. They might be good now.
Okay.
And Los Angeles has two teams, and one of them is quite good. But there are rivals because I'm a Northern Californian, so I do.
Are there how many teams does California have? The Oakland A's, right? Or
Well, we had the Oakland A's. Oakland will be gone soon. So they have Oakland, they have San Francisco, they have two in LA, and they have San Diego. So if I'm not,
are there
this case, I'm
5
not
teams
right.
in California?
Yeah,
I mean, we have a lot of people here, so I suppose
We
it
do.
sustains it.
right. Baseball.
Yeah. Okay, but here's my question: is the
Yeah.
World Series of Baseball, right?
Yeah.
Is that an international competition besides Canada?
No, and it would be better if it was. I think. I think it would be really interesting if you involved Japan or Cuba or some of these other world powers in the World Series.
Right, some other countries that genuinely love baseball and have flourishing baseball.
I mean, we get a ton of baseball players from the Caribbean. Loves folks in the Caribbean. Lots of great players in Dominican Republic and all those places. So
Right.
yeah, I don't know why we do. Well, I'm not in charge of baseball, so.
Well, no. I mean, it's probably one of those things that Cuba might win. And
they won Olympic baseball medals before.
Yeah, Tyson, for the love of my earballs, knock it off. Okay, so I don't know. Could you hear it? Can you hear him barking?
Leave it. It's not that
there
bad.
it is. Okay, good. That's the good news. Is that It's not that loud. Yes, run towards a bird. Okay, there we go. We're at like 52 minutes. We're plugging along here.
Right.
Are there stories? Are there sports? Are there issues that have not been addressed in your love of the Olympics in this particular hour of the Dork Forest? Though let me just tell people that I am talking with Maria Kay, and she has a book called "Women and the Olympic Dream," and it is on Amazon and all the things. And there'll be a link in the in the notes, and it's kmeister.com because that's funny. KAJMEISTER. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you for that. It was funny. It was a joke on Saturday Night Live like 20 years ago or something. They were talking. Sting was on and they called him the Stingmeister. And I thought, oh, that'd be funny. I'll make my name K-Meister. And I put it in my AOL email is K-Meister.
Yes, I have the same problem. My name is something like Jesus on AOL. It's not. I only use it as a backup email, so nobody needs to care.
Well, and so, but I kind of kept it, and so I became my server, and so then I created a website, and that seemed like the logical name for me. So I write a blog, so I'm a blogger on my website. I don't get any money for it. It's just the love of writing about history, and way back when I first started the blog in 2016, I started writing about the Olympics, and it turned into a love of writing about the Olympics. And I actually wrote another little book about the Rio Games, about the little sports that Americans won in the Rio Games. And then over time.
What did we win?
Oh, well, we won these gold medals in wrestling that nobody ever heard of. We won, gold medals in boxing and whatnot.
A specific part of wrestling? Like how many kinds of wrestling is there? And isn't it mostly just you get somebody in a headlock and you wait until somebody gets tired? I don't know a lot about wrestling.
Yeah, no, there's Greco-Roman wrestling where you can only use the upper body. So you have to somebody only using the upper body. But there's also wrestling called freestyle, and a lot of that involves they call it shooting, meaning you kind of go for the opponent's legs and try to get them off balance, right? Or try to push them out of the circle. And so, Americans are very, have been good at wrestling. We were very good in the 1980s. Then we got less good. And this was really a resurgence of our capability, but nobody knows about it, right? Nobody's ever heard of it. So there were two people who won gold medals that I thought was very interesting. So I was writing about them because I thought they should get their due. Or I mentioned the water polo team, the women's water polo team that had won a medal and nobody ever heard of their water polo team. So, I like to focus on these people in sports that maybe get a little bit less attention than.
Right, because there's such a huge commitment to get at that level.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
in 2016, we even our Matthew Centrowitz, American, won the mile, the 1500, but I call it the mile.
Right.
And it was very rare for us to win middle distance races. What happens is, our country, other countries, I was talking about Serbia and Fiji, but Americans, we really focus on certain things like the sprints. We just really get focused on the 100 meters, the 200 meters. And then you get to the middle distance, 1500, 3000, whatever. Let the Africans have those or, whoever is good at those races. And so if you are an American who is interested in those other things, it can be very difficult for you to get money, airspace, airtime. So it's really amazing when we can maybe make a stride.
When someone does rise to that occasion,
to do it because the international competition is really hard, but maybe America isn't the best. We don't necessarily have the best coaches or training staff and things like that. So that's why I kind of get interested sometimes when an American wins that rare event.
Right, and that middle level. Right, the long distance is a lot of African countries. Are they getting our countries? It's so interesting because there was like the luge team that was from Fiji or something that made everybody laugh.
Jamaica, the Jamaica, I think were
because they don't have any snow.
Yeah,
and but they do have electricity, so it'll be fine.
Yeah,
but but are there anything that has been incongruous like that people are they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe the ski team. I mean, Kilimanjaro's in Africa. I'm sure
Well,
there's some good skiing.
well, it's more that Ethiopia, Kenya, right? The mountainous areas of that particular part of Africa, high altitude, right? So if you grow up there, you process oxygen better. So you're
Oh,
good.
right,
You're
the
good.
lungs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was one of the reasons why the Kenyans and the Ethiopians and North Africans, when they first started running under their own banner. So again, you got to imagine the 1950s, right? These countries were not independent. So they had runners, maybe, but they were either British runners or French runners, they were white people under the African nations. So in the 1950s and 60s, as these countries kind of gained their independence, that's when you started seeing runners show up who were actually, black Ethiopians as opposed to something else. And they started winning races, and they got pretty famous and very good very quickly, partly because culturally they were good, partly because it was the altitude. And
right,
then
the geography of it. I can't go to Denver.
Yeah, exactly. And where the United States we finally figured this out. Where should we put our Olympic practice area? Took us a long time, but yeah, Colorado. It's in Colorado Springs.
How long did it take us?
That's where the U.S. Olympic thing now is housed, is Colorado Springs.
Did it take the 1970s? Like it was 40 years ago?
Yeah, I think it was pretty late in the, first we just complained. And then it's like, well, maybe we should do that. And then maybe we should hire the coaches and, get all the staffs and
right. The people who know who've coached the winners,
Exactly.
Well, I have to say this, Maria, this has been amazing. I have learned things. Now I kind of want to go find. I do love sailing. Anyway, there are things I want to watch now. But it's Maria K. KAJMEISTER.com. And the book is called Women in the Olympic Dream. Thank you so much for doing the Dork Forest. This has been super fun. And I love that you were willing to do it with like no notice.
Can you do it now? Okay, sure.
It was great.
We'll schedule it between the garage door getting fixed and, taking the trash out. Okay, sure, yeah.
Exactly.
No, phenomenal for me. I love it.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. And Rangers, you know the rules out there. Take care of each other.
Hi, Adal. How was the show?
It was fascinating. It was about the Olympics.
The Olympics?
The Olympics. Maria K. has written a book called, and you have the name of it there, actually. It's Women and
the Olympic Dream.
Yes. From 1896 to 2021. And it was fascinating. And essentially it was her dissertation, and it was kind of infuriating and inspiring and all of the things.
Yeah.
It's an Olympic year, women's.
It is.
It's a Summer Olympics in Paris.
Right. That's right.
And we have Peacock.
Oh, right. So we'll be able to watch people much younger than ourselves doing things that we never could.
Never could, and never, in this case,
and
never
we'll
wanted
be
to.
Able to.
Never wanted to.
Which was the first Olympics that you realized that you were never going to be an Olympic athlete?
The first Olympics I saw. I never wanted to be an Olympic athlete.
I never wanted to be, but at some point I realized that I was never going to be, and that was different.
Interesting.
Right.
I think the first X Games, I realized that I was never going to be able to be a skateboarder.
Oh, yeah.
It's the one time I did skateboard, I broke my wrist.
Oh.
And I didn't skateboard. I jumped on a skateboard in front of Salmon, Maya, and Paul to stop an argument among the kids. I was just trying to, like the child of divorced parents that I was. And I wiped out, scraped the right side of my body, broke my wrist, and didn't know my wrist was broken for hours because I thought it was all the right side of the body.
Right.
And young Paul Boyer at that time, 12, he
drove you to the hospital.
Drove me to the hospital. Helped me get to the hospital. He was actually quite a very mature young man. He did a nice job. But here was the weird thing that I did find out was that there were several sports that were co-ed until the women won.
Oh, interesting. And then the men were like, well, we need a safe space for this sport.
And it was rifles. It was rifles and then pistols.
Oh, interesting.
And I believe, if I remember correctly, she said the equestrian is still co-ed. So the men must have still been winning.
Right.
And there are some sports where the women don't get to do the same course because it's too dangerous. And they're afraid that our uteruses will fall out.
Right.
Not even kidding. Literally, that our uteruses are going to fall out.
I don't think that's the worry.
No, that was that. No, in real life, that wasn't the worry because it wasn't even medical. It wasn't. It was. They got a doctor to say it, but there had been no studies.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was completely insane. But
they just needed a doctor who felt the same way, and that was it.
That was it. But Maria Kay had some great stories about the Olympics, and it kind of made me excited to see the Olympics this summer.
Oh, well, that's cool.
And she said there's a lot of really cool, just on YouTube. You could just watch the greatest.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah. For some reason, my feed has chock full of gymnastics.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Because of those guys I've been watching as they, medalist gymnasts trying to do the things that they see people do on TikTok or on YouTube.
Right. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So cool. And so it was a great episode, and I hope everyone enjoyed it.
Yay.
And you know the rules out there. Take care of each other.
My hat, my hat, my hat. They're dancing around my hat, my hat, my hat, my hat. Well, what do you think of that? If it looks like a Mexican hat dance and it sounds like a Mexican hat dance, it's most likely a Mexican hat dance. So take off your hat and let's dance.
Yay! Oh my God. Why don't we just call that as the end of the show?